Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello, folks, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight, again, with another fan submission. This one involving, well, he was a prisoner. And in prison, he's had a kind of an interesting childhood. And he's had, when you're in prison, you're looking for things to kill your time because you're doing time, you're bored. And one of the things that interested him was his past experiences with Ouija boards. And they ended up making a makeshift Ouija board in prison. And this is an experience, it didn't just happen overnight. This is prolonged over years. And some really interesting things happen with that. I mean, it's one thing to conjure an entity, and it's another thing to be confined in that same cell with an entity, and you can't escape. So we're going to cover that. But before we do, if you have an effed up story on the paranormal, or you have pictures or video, we'd like to get it from you, and you can get it to us on the official website, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. We'll get it on the website, and we will get it into a podcast because we are making an effort to get every submission into a podcast. And in the next, I would say next week, we're going to be covering near-death experiences. And I've gotten a couple submissions from you folks now, and great submissions. So we're going to be covering that. And if any of you listening have your own near-death experience, I ask that you send that in, and we will get it into the podcast. This story comes in from a fellow named Martin. And as I said, Martin's had an interesting life as he, by his own admission, he was into a lot of trouble as a kid. That's how he ended up in prison. Right now he's 35, but this story goes all the way back to when he was in 1996. He was a destructive teenager. He ended up in Borstals, which is a youth detention center, and prison while he was in England and the United Kingdom. For this story, he was 16 at the time, and he had a few prior Ouija board experiences, but of course, what he experienced in prison was tenfold. So, as I mentioned, when you're in prison, and I'm saying this not having been there, I can understand, and how he put it, that he has a lot of time on his hand. He doesn't have a lot of things to do, so you really try to figure out how to occupy your time. What can you do with your limited things in this confined cell? And at this time, he was in a double cell, and he had a cellmate, and they just happened to be discussing ghosts and spirits and Ouija boards. And he was telling him basically, he was telling them they're real. He's had these experiences. He knows that they're real. And he relayed one of the stories he had as a child, and it went like this. So this is when he's back, and he's like 11 years old. He's not in prison yet. And on this particular night, him and his friend and his older brother and his older brother's girlfriend were hanging out. And they decided, or the older brother decided, it would be a great idea for them to play with a Ouija board. And they didn't actually have one, so they made a makeshift Ouija board. They used, paper and stuff like that around the house. The brother's girlfriend would cut out the various shapes needed for, the letters and the goodbye and the yes and no. And he said it was around 8 or 9 p.m. at night. His dad was currently out, and so it was the opportune time to start. So they started by asking the Ouija board questions. He said he can't remember specifically what the questions they were, but, they were the general and common kinds, such as, is anybody there? Don't be scared. Come out and talk. We won't harm you. Who are you? And so on. And they used a wine glass as the planchette. So they're asking these questions, and he remembers his brother's girlfriend. She was the main one in charge here. She was the one asking the questions. And they were doing this for a little while, and then for some reason, she didn't want to use the wine glass as the planchette anymore. She suggested that they all got up, formed a circle, and held hands around the table instead. And she would still ask the questions. So they took the wine glass and they put it on one side, and they all held hands, and they started to question the Ouija board in this way. And then they introduced a bicycle flashlight to the center of the table and asked, to the spirit, if you were there and you want to answer our questions, please make the bicycle flashlight turn on. Flash twice for no and once for yes. And then the spirit or entity began communicating with them by flashing the bike lamp, to give them answers to their questions. And he said, well, he didn't ask any questions, and the brother's girlfriend was the one who solely did this. At some point, something happened. There was some answer that she was given that scared her. And when this happened, he said the whole atmosphere of the room changed. And it got so intense that the older brother actually had removed himself from the circle and walked out of the room. And he said something to the effect of, I'm not doing this anymore. He was done. And everybody knew he was scared, and he walked out. So, in any case, Martin didn't mind, and he wasn't particularly scared. He was a cocky, young troublemaker. So they rejoined hands and carried on with the session. And he said the wine glass from earlier that was put to the side suddenly fell from where it was on the shelf or the unit dresser, wherever it was, and it smashed on the floor. And at this time, he said the bike light starts flashing. And he said they all shit their pants and ran out of the room. He said they gathered into the hallway, they started panicking, and they looked at each other in disbelief because something actually happened. And then the phone rang. And his older brother picked up the phone. And he had this puzzled look on his face. He just put the phone to his ear, and after a few seconds of listening, he passed the receiver over to his girlfriend. And when he did so, she let out a scream. She threw the phone down, and they all took off out into the front yard of the house. And as they were out in the front yard, and they were, because only the girlfriend really knows, and I guess the older brother kind of knows what happened. And, Martin and his friend, frantic, wanting to know what happened. And the brother explained that when he picked up the phone, he heard a voice, but the connection was really bad. He said it was crackly and full of static. And, Martin, he says that this gives him goosebumps as he recalls this, but he said through the static on the phone, he could hear a voice, and the voice was whispering, "Help me," over and over. So his brother, being the knight in shining armor, passes the phone to his girlfriend. But as soon as she said hello, this screaming voice, this fucking bitch, right? And her hysteria, of course, was contagious, and they all just freaked out and ran out into the front yard. So, Martin believes that whatever it was, it wasn't human. It was something else, and he believes that the activity of using the Ouija board generated this fear between them, and this fear attracted something, and that something fed on that fear that they were giving out, and it gave them power to communicate with them via the bicycle lamp and eventually their home phone.
That's pretty perceptive.
Yeah, especially for an 11-year-old. So this is the story Martin tells in prison. This is the story he just tells his cellmate. So now we're going to go back to the present time where not present, but in his story, it's present time, he's in prison. He just shared this story with his new cellmate, and a cellmate is pretty amazed with it. And he tells him that, Martin tells him that the experience, it still scares him today, but I mean, he has an undeniable interest in this. And despite his fear of it, telling the story gave him this urge. He's bored, remember, he's in this cell. It gives him this urge to create a new makeshift Ouija board. And, his cellmate was interested in the idea as well. So like before, they created it using, paper ripped up into little squares with the alphabet and the numbers and yes and no and goodbye pieces. And
obviously not a person who's used to making good life choices.
Well, how perceptive of you. So, I guess I can understand it, though, because there is an undeniable attraction to things that we're not supposed to play with. If there's one thing I'm guilty of, and you too, Ryan, is that we're always picking where we shouldn't be picking.
Oh, most definitely.
And in
not to the extent that I ever ended up in jail, though.
Yeah, well, hopefully that never happens.
We'll see.
We'll see. Yeah, this podcast would be kind of hard to carry out over a prison phone.
Who knows?
Yeah, well, yeah. In any case, going back to Martin's story here. So, they're in there, they're making this makeshift Ouija board. And he said a cellmate has never used a Ouija board before. But he told him anyway, he said, you are supposed to put a 5-pointed star in the middle of the board, and in each corner of the star, place a letter. And of course, the letters that we're going to go there, it's a 5-pointed star. There's, 5 little corners to put the words, and I'm supposed to spell out Satan. Now, for the record, I've never seen this in any Ouija board, but, there's always modifications that can be done. So that's what they did. And he said they drew the 5-pointed star on the floor in pen and spelled Satan's name around it, with each letter going in one of the 5 corners of the 5-pointed star. And he said he arranged their paper numbers and the alphabet around the star with a yes and a no, and they had, the goodbye. So in any case, for a pointer, obviously they weren't going to get a wine glass because that could be a weapon in prison. So what they used, and not just this case, but in every case, they'd find something, whether it was a deodorant lid, a piece of glass broken from a coffee jar. So there goes my theory just then. But they would always find something, a lid of some type that they could use as a planchette. And they finally managed to cobble together their very own makeshift Ouija board made from paper in their cell. And whenever, because remember, this is not just one time that they used this prolonged over a period of time. They'd use it every night. So whenever they decided they were going to use it, they would draw this 5-pointed star, and then when they were done with their session, they would rub it out. So in any case, they had many experiences with the Ouija board, but the following are the ones that stuck with him the most. So on this one particular night, his cellmate and himself, Martin, sets up the Ouija board, and they began by contacting spirits that they were told were from their past, people that they might have known in previous lives. But then they started to get something else, which he believes was a demon. It began by causing the planchette to move in a pattern of figure 8s. Now, if you recall from our Zozo episode, We've actually done 2, one on Halloween and one was a user submitted story. But that is the calling card of a demon who calls itself Zozo, as that it starts by making these figure 8 patterns. So they're getting these figure 8 patterns, and it repeated this many times, moving around the board very fast. It also started to move around this 5-pointed star, eventually spelling out Satan. And every time they asked the spirit if Satan is who they were dealing with, they were being told it was. And he said he knew it was them, or he knew it was Satan. Like he knew it because of the way he felt. Like he just had this intuition. And he does say that in the beginning, it was actually kind of a good experience. He said that he was quite comical. He liked to joke and play tricks. Like he'd ask him how many wives he had, and he said he had over 300. At first it was just like a running gag for them. It was just something for them to play with. He said, he could answer questions about that only you or your friend would know. Names of family, names of grandparents, and so on. And sometimes he put out like a random name that at first you don't recognize the connection. You just think it's some bullshit name. But he said eventually you'll realize that you actually, like, the name makes sense in some kind of context. Like at some point it actually has more meaning, and it's not just some random thing. There's a message behind it.
And that's actually a hallmark of quote unquote demonic experiences, that a spirit that's associated with you or your family might have knowledge of you or your family, but a demonic entity typically has information. It's a spirit that you don't know, you're not associated with. This isn't grandpa. He isn't telling you about your brothers and sisters. But it's an unknown entity that's telling you things that nobody else could possibly know. And that's one of the hallmarks.
It certainly is. And that's something that he there's something he says at the end. I'm not going to spoil it for now, but it was very interesting. So when we get to that, I'll point it out again. So, he kind of goes on a little tangent about his belief system at this point. He believes that these entities feed off their energy, not just any energy, but fear. And I believe that's true as well. I've heard that, and I get that sensation when I've fooled around with this stuff. And he said,
why else would they go through so much trouble to scare the shit out of people?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And, on this other particular night, he says, he knows it sounds silly, but on this particular night in the cell, there was a storm outside. It was, it was raining really hard, and it was accompanied by thunder and lightning. I love those nights, for the record. But anyway, he said he asked their spirit that they had, identified on the Ouija board at that point as Satan, and he asks it if he was responsible for the storm that was outside, and it says yes. So he asks it to make more thunder and more lightning. And what's interesting about this is that he repeatedly would ask it to create like thunder or lightning at a particular moment, and it's like it would on cue. And he said he got the the sensation that they were controlling the storm themselves through it. It was so accurate and so on time to what they'd ask. It was like the second that they asked for it to, create a lightning strike or a boom of thunder, it would happen. And he did this multiple times over the course of 20 minutes. And it gave them a little bit of a high, right? To feel like that they were able to control the storm in some way. And after this, they started asking it questions like, if they could have some power of some kind, is it possible that he could give it to them? You know, and the way that he said it to him, he said, you know, we're prisoners. We're basically evil anyway. So we will do your deeds. You know, we would do whatever you ask. Just, you know, give us power. Give us whatever, right? And that, you know, they made this plea, and he would make bad things. He started making bad things happen to those around them that otherwise meant them harm. And he elaborates on this a little further on. So this is actually an example of that. On this one particular day, they had this female officer in the jail, right? And she had a problem with Martin, and she ordered him back to a cell. And what it was, see, they're allowed to go to this canteen, which is basically a store in prison. You know, you have your jobs in prison. You have your ways that you make wage. I mean, people can give you money, like your family or whatever, but for everything else, like you have these odd jobs or you know, jobs that you can have in jail, and they pay money and it goes into your account, and their equivalent of a store is the canteen. So on a scheduled release, I guess, they can go to this canteen and spend their money, and they can get things like you know, they could get batteries for their radio, because they weren't allowed to, you know, back then they didn't have electricity in their cells. So they had radios and stuff like that. So to keep that going, they'd have to go buy batteries. And, you know, with the only, you know, caveat, I guess, is that you couldn't, if you had batteries and you wanted to get new batteries, you'd have to, you couldn't just buy new ones. You had to bring your old ones and give them in before they'd let you buy new ones. So in any case, the rule was you couldn't just, you know, you had to have a canteen bag to put the stuff in. You weren't allowed to be keeping old batteries and stuff like that. And what Martin had been doing was collecting them and keeping them in his pillowcase. And when the officer found that out, you know, she ordered him to take it out, or he wasn't going to be allowed to go to the canteen. And he was, you know, he was going to be stuck in the cell while everybody else went. And anyway, Martin refused for whatever reason. He was sent back to his cell, and he was pretty pissed off about it. So when they were using the Ouija board later that night, you know, again, it started out with the planchette doing the figure eights. It did the spelled Satan around the 5-pointed star. And almost as soon as the session started, it spelled out, "Kill her." And he questioned, he was like, "What? Kill who? What are you talking about?" And, you know, it spells it again. And it puts an emphasis on it. And him and a cellmate looked at each other with these really strange looks. And Martin knew, like he understood. And he said to his cellmate, it's like, you know, kill the bitch, kill her. And he was referencing the officer that had, you know, kept him from going to the canteen earlier. And, you know, he was kind of blown away by this. And he said he knew who it was speaking about, and he could feel the energy. And he replied, he said, like, "How do you think I can kill her?" He said, "You know, I can't do that. I'm trapped in this cell." And the board says, "Make knife." And then it spells knife again. And, you know, once again, you know, and Martin's getting goosebumps telling the story, puts his little emphasis here. You know, he says, "I can't kill her. You know, she's a prison officer. I'll get time. I'll get life. I can't do it." And then the board replies, "You lied. You are not evil." And at that point, he basically became really nasty towards Martin and a cellmate. I guess because, you know, he took them up on their offer to do these evil deeds in you know, exchange for him doing stuff for them. So at this point, he said the spirit wasn't a joking spirit anymore. It genuinely didn't really like them. He said every time that him and a cellmate would try to use the Ouija board, it basically, the spirit that they picked up, who they thought was the same spirit, would try to do something to scare them. It said on occasion it would pretend to be a different spirit, but he said deep down he knew it was the same one, and, you know, he would, you know, something would come about that would reveal it. You know, he said he could feel it. He said he could tell it was playing. He could just feel it. And he said, you know, there was nobody else on the other side. Like when they went to contact spirits, it's like they always got him. It's like he got the impression there either wasn't any other spirits, or the other spirits or entities that were there were too scared to come through, because this particular spirit, whether it was Satan or Zozo or whatever you want to name it, that spirit was so bad that no other spirits would come near. And he gives an example of this. He says one time he was talking to what he believed was another spirit, and because he said that like when he tried to contact Satan or whatever, it wouldn't work, right? And at some point in his questioning, he got suspicious, and he questioned the spirit, and he insinuated that it was indeed the same one, and he did end up admitting to it. And at the same time, he warned them from trying to contact him again, or I guess even using the Ouija board at all. So, you know, they gave up, and as long as he had this cellmate, they never used it again. You know, they were kind of spooked off from it. But eventually, Martin gets moved to a new cell. And he said, it's funny using a Ouija board in prison because, you know, it being a prison is already filled with negative energy, you know, from its dark history. It's full of dark and grim places. So anyway, there he was, you know, a new prison, new cellmate. And at this point in time, he's 18 years old. And he said, you know, the cellmate he had at this particular time, he was a young kid. He was only 16, but he was in for murder, and he was doing 12 years. I mean, Martin, in contrast, was in there for burglary, and was only doing 4 years. But, you know, the story of the 16-year-old was that he was burglaring a house one day, and while he was in someone's house, the owner came home, and the owner trapped him in the house while he was robbing it. The kid panicked, he grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed the house owner 14 times, right? And I mean, that even kind of, gives Martin the chills. I mean, he's sharing a cell with this guy, right? But anyway, like before, these two guys are sitting around in the cell. They're sharing stories, and they get onto the topic of ghosts. And Martin tells them about his past experiences with the Ouija board. So just like before, they ended up getting interested in the idea and making another makeshift Ouija board. And they communicated with spirits, and once again, they pick up the same one that Martin had gotten before. The one that spelled out Satan using the 5-pointed star. And this spirit started to move the planchette into figure 8 patterns. And like Martin said, he could feel it. It was the same monster. It was the same entity that he had been in contact with his previous cellmate. And he said he could tell that this spirit knew he was scared. And he said he thinks he knows, like, the spirit knew who he was. But for whatever reason, the spirit was okay this time. He said he introduced his new cellmate to him, and he said, you know, because of everything that had transpired, I mean, he made a real effort this time to get to know what this spirit was, you know, to get to know what he was all about. So he started to ask him some, I guess, general questions. And one of it was he asked to recommend some music to him. And his reply was Nirvana, Unplugged New York. And, Martin ended up ordering that album, and he really liked it. And he asked all these like other general questions, like who killed Tupac, and the answer was the Black Panthers, and apparently Satan likes Elvis. I don't know, but he asked all these different questions to get a general idea of the personality of what the spirit was. And anyway, this was fun. I mean, that was their first little foray into this. And, on the topic of music and stuff like that, Martin had wanted to get a CD. I mean, that stuff's a real treat, I guess, when you have nothing and you're in a prison cell. I mean, you really look forward to getting music or anything like that to, I guess, help pass the time and stuff. And at this particular...
Asked to escape.
Yeah, escape.
Can you get me an early parole?
Yeah, that's a good. That would be the top thing I think I would ask. Yeah. In any case, um, at this point in time, all Martin's money was gone. Right? I mean, they don't get a lot anyway in prison. And the little bit that he did have coming in, he spent on food and little knickknacks the week before. And for this reason, he asked the spirit if he could more or less, use his powers so that he could somehow order a CD and get it despite having a zero balance in his bank account. And the spirit agreed. So, the idea being that the spirit would mess with the computer systems, and that Martin the next day, it told him that the next day he should fill out this application, because what it was is he had to fill out an application to order a CD. It would be sent off, and if the money was in his account, it would be processed and the product shipped back. So he did that knowing he had no money, and really it shouldn't have worked, but it did. He said about 2 weeks later or so, the CD was brought to him by the staff, and he couldn't really explain how that happened. So when he did his session again, he thanked Satan for giving him a CD. But anyway, he kept having these regular sessions with the Ouija board, and sometimes they would do the board without the 5-pointed star. And one time while they did it without that, they made contact with a dead Irishman, and the dead Irishman mentioned something about his son in the late 40s, and he just kept going on about it. So Martin and a cellmate asked him if there was anything he could do to help him. And so the spirit asked if, he could tell his son that he loved him, right? And that he was watching over him, and he was okay, and he was happy. And he also gave him a special phrase to use when he spoke to this son that only the son would know. And then he gave him an address and a name to send a message to. So, they're bored inmates, and they thought, screw it, we'll try to carry out this Irishman's wishes. So they wrote up a small, peaceful letter, and they explained that they were just asked to send this on to whoever the recipient was. They put it in an envelope, they put it in the prison mailbox, and they sent it on its way. And he said, while he doesn't know if he ever got it or whatever, he felt good that he did a good deed just by doing it. But anyway, following that, he's using the Ouija board again. He's got the 5-pointed star, and knowing what he knows now, he says that he knows that it wasn't actually Satan he was dealing with, but he believes it was Zozo. And since being out of prison, he's watched all these videos, he's read all these stories, and all that stuff that they tell you, and the stuff that we said, the figure eights and the different mannerisms and stuff like that comes about. He said that's exactly what he experienced. And he said, he can watch a video, and just by the way that it reacts, and the way the planchette moves, and the way that the figure eights and the behavior, it's like he knows that is the same entity that he had dealt with when he was in prison. So some of the things that he came away, or he took away from this, is that when you start out and you have this experience with this thing, he said essentially it starts on a blank slate, and in the beginning he was on its good side, right? And when you're on its good side, it's not so bad. He's kind of joking. He's he has a sense of humor. It's kind of this fun thing. But when you get onto his bad side, it's a nightmare. He said eventually, after you have so many sessions, he'll tell you not to mention your sessions or meetings with him. And if you decide to rebel against his wishes, he'll turn really nasty and begin threatening you. So at this point in time, him and a cellmate, by the way, whose name is Anthony, they were on the good side of the spirit. And at this point in time, there's this other cellmate that they share a dislike of, okay? And he's got a fictitious name, but we'll call him Malcolm. That's what he calls him here. And Malcolm, he was put on a pedestal in prison, basically. The officers loved him because he was really good at football, and the other inmates were kind of jealous because, he got extra time in the gym because of his talent for it. And the guards would sometimes let Malcolm and a couple of his friends go outside to play, football, while everyone else had to stay in their cell. So on this one particular day, the special group, Malcolm and his buddies, they were outside, they were playing, and they come back in, and they were bragging about how the officers had given them beer. And, apparently this is very illegal for them to do, and it pissed off all the other inmates. And it really pissed off Martin and Anthony, because, they were already on bad terms with this guy. And so when they went at the Ouija board again, they asked Zozo, or whatever you want to call him, how do you make a voodoo doll of Malcolm, right? And he told us how to do it, but he also said that he was going to, this is Satan, or Zozo, that's saying this, said he was going to pay Malcolm a visit in a cell. And right after he did that, he messages back and says he's in Malcolm's cell right now, and he's doing bad stuff to him. And, long story short, so that happens, and we're going to revisit that, what actually happened, in a bit. And after that, Martin and Anthony, they go and make this voodoo doll, as they were told to by the spirit. And they said, they began by stabbing it, twisting its legs, hoping that they would hear Malcolm scream from a cell, but they didn't hear anything. And a few weeks later, a security prison search turned up drugs in the cell of Malcolm and his buddies, as well as their work area, right? And that was, the timing was impeccable, right? So as a result, they ended up getting sacked. They had the best jobs in the prison at the time. They lost that. They got charged with drugs, and their good reputation with the guards and stuff, that was all ruined as well. And so, ironically, Martin and Anthony ended up getting those good jobs. And, he doesn't know if it was the spirit's doing, but I mean, the timing was right. And the entity had said he just went into the cell and he was doing stuff. And then right after that, the security guards find the drugs, right? So that was an interesting coincidence. But, eventually, the spirit got really sick of talking to Martin. Long story short, I mean, he's a bored prisoner, right? He's constantly, every night, contacting this guy. And he said, eventually, it said to him, "Martin, do not mess with me, or I will come for you. You have been warned." And he said, he admits, it really spooked him, and he heeded the warning. And eventually, he got his own cell. And, he had stopped using the Ouija board for weeks, and he promised himself he would leave it alone. But he said, in the cell all by himself, he could feel that this spirit was still with him. He'd have these terrifying dreams. He could feel the presence. And I remember him, one of the dreams was, it was something like some cable. I think it was like a cable coming from his speaker to something else. It'd come out and start strangling him in his sleep, and he'd wake up and see something at the door of his cell. So he felt like he was being tormented by this spirit, and he was confined with it, stuck in the cell all by himself for a while, right? And the last time he used a Ouija board was when he was out of prison, and he never went back with it, because he decided he wasn't going to push his luck. He said he knew that if he had kept at it, that this Zozo or whatever spirit it was going to show up again. But he did find something related and interesting, and this is what I was speaking of earlier. He found this old book, and the old book was on spirits and stuff like that. And it had this little bit in there about how the dead can't speak, right? Because when you're using the Ouija board, the whole idea is that you're speaking to these dead spirits. But this book says the dead don't speak, but the demons will the voices of the dead. Which is to say, the demons can speak in the voice of your loved ones, and they know their whole story. They know everything that's happened to them, everybody they know the history, so it's very easy for them to deceive you. And they said, he said, if you speak to a spirit, never believe what they tell you. They mimic your loved ones. And whatever these spirits are, they're jealous of our place here on earth. And they're so jealous that they want to kill us. And they do that by controlling us. They can have us kill each other, or, whatever. But the devil's biggest trick is to convince us that he does not exist. And I think that's true, right? I mean, most of what we know or what we hear or whatever, I mean, we can chalk most of it up to good Hollywood movies, right? In mainstream media, at least. And, we do have these stories from different individuals, but, there's no, like, I forget where I'm trying to go with this. Ryan,
well, I know what old book about spirits he's talking about, because I believe that's right in the Bible. It says, don't take part in mediums, because the spirits of the dead, they go to heaven or hell right away. So they're not hanging around to talk with you. So if you're talking to some quote unquote spirit, it's not the spirit of a person. Now, again, I don't know how much how much stock I personally put in the Bible, but that's where that comes from, most definitely.
My question is, if it's from the Bible, how do you forget the name of that book?
Obviously, the book the book he's referencing isn't the Bible, but that's where that book that he's referencing got that little line from. That's because there's a whole, I don't know, I'm not going to say section, but there's definitely a paragraph in there somewhere that details, don't use magic and don't use necromancy and don't contact spirits and don't go to mediums, because all the spirits that you're going to come in contact with aren't the spirits of people who were once living. They're the spirits of demons. I guess that's the paraphrased version of that.
Well, one thing I will say, in terms of spirits and whether you can contact them or not, and this is from just a near-death experience. I've been reading tons of the stuff in the past couple months, and as you know, we're going to be doing a podcast on it. But one of the things that, this is echoed through a lot of people's experiences, is that there are spirits that stay here on Earth for whatever reason. Many times because they're afraid to be judged. They're afraid to go into the dark, and they stay here. So it would seem plausible to me that you could somehow contact them.
Well, me, I'm a big advocate for not listening to anything that's in the Bible. So, bust out the Ouija boards and the mediums.
Careful now, you're going to get this call to be dropped.
And yeah, there you go. Go for it.
But
I have protection this time.
Is it the talisman?
Well, I don't know if I call it a talisman, but it's definitely a very artfully crafted, I guess you'd say, spell that a concerned listener has sent in to us. I don't know if concerned listener or a proactive listener. And I don't know. Did they say that they did or did not want their name?
Well, that's what I was just thinking, because I was just thinking I could announce a giant thank you on the air, but I don't know.
Well, either way, you know who you are. I do currently have your gift put out before me, and I'm in the process of getting actually a picture frame to put it in, so I can hang it right above my monitor, so that it's always visible while I'm doing my podcasts. I am very appreciative of the work that you've put in, and it is it's quite striking. That's for sure.
And as am I. I'm obviously I'm appreciative because he came to me and I got him to send it to you as you're closer to the border. And in any case, as Ryan said, you know who you are, and very appreciative. I'm very interested to see how this plays out, by the way. And I actually had meant to email him that you got it the other day. It's just every time I come home, I got 3 or 4 submissions, and we've been pumping out these podcasts as fast
Well,
as we can make
I
them.
think either way, I think we'd be pretty safe in saying thank you, James, for your contribution to Effed Up Stories.
There you go. Okay. First name basis. That'll work.
There should be at least 1 million people with with the name James just in the northern hemisphere here.
Yeah. So I think we're safe. So just a little bit, I guess we'll just discuss a little bit on the whole Zozo phenomenon. I mean, we're not going to go into very much of it just because, we've
covered it twice before.
We've covered it twice before.
I mean, it's pretty striking how, again, here we have somebody who has detailed a very specific, set of actions connected to the Ouija board. The figure 8. I've used a Ouija board a couple of dozen times myself. And personally, I've never gotten the figure 8. So, I mean, perhaps this is a surefire sign of the presence of Zozo, or Zozo and co. Perhaps he has associates. I mean, who knows how the spirit world is structured.
Well,
but it is a striking similarity.
I guess what surprises me the most, because when we did our Halloween episode on it, I mean, I went scrounging the internet for Ouija board stories. I knew we wanted to do one on Ouija boards. I hadn't even heard of Zozo before, right? And when I found that phenomenon, I didn't really think it was that well known. And I remember a lot of our listeners commenting that they hadn't heard of it before. So I don't know how well known it is. Maybe it is, and just not our neck of the woods was really up on it. But we're after getting several submissions on that same topic, and it's just surprising. I thought it was going to be more rare than that, and it seems like a lot of people have had that very experience. Have come in contact with that spirit. Always with the figure 8s, always with the, it would be a little depressing, but imagine if the only spirit out there was him. Right?
Else is listening. Everybody else in the spirit world has jobs.
Yeah.
Zozo is the only one on spiritual.
He's over sitting in a corner with a dunce hat on, right? It's like, get over there. Sit in the corner. Shut your mouth. It's like,
the only one who bothers to contact us paltry humans.
It's like their equivalent of like the social media, right? It's like, well, on my Facebook, fuck Facebook. On my Ouija board, I got this guy and this guy and this guy, and just poor Zozo sitting over there in the corner. These are all my friends.
Whenever I see a story where somebody is, claiming that that's Satan himself, the devil himself, the king of all evil, is contacting me. Of course, the first thing I do is roll my eyes, because let's face it, if such a being exists, they have far more important things to worry about than some individual person. They have genocides to look after, and wars to start, and nations to starve, and cities to bankrupt, and
the spiritual war of the end of all kind, and
all those things. But I really do like how at some point this individual realizes, well, this isn't Satan. I mean, if you're some faceless unknown spirit, I mean, let's face it, using a Ouija board is like using the internet. You can pop on there and claim to be, hey, I'm Charlie Sheen. Look at my email, Charlie Sheen at 69 at hotmail.com.
Well, where's all the celebrities down there? I mean, we got Satan, we got Beelzebub, Azazel. Are they the celebrities of the underworld?
Well, I guess. I mean, them and Hitler and Stalin, and I guess there would be, but it's one of those things that you see all the time, right? It's somebody claiming that they have contact with the devil, But I do like how at some point this guy realizes, oh, I'm not communicating with the king of hell, the lord of all evil, the prince of darkness. I'm contacting some other spirit, and then later makes a connection to Zozo because of the personal experiences that he's had. But I also like how, there seems to be a particular presence that manifests with these entities. It's almost like, perhaps each spirit has their own kind of energy fingerprint, and that expresses itself in a very particular way. And when you're interacting with a given spirit for a length of time, regardless of what they tell you or what they pretend to be, on some level, you kind of detect that presence, that fingerprint, whether it's the way the Ouija board acts, the way they answer questions. There's some quality about the interaction, all of the little idiosyncrasies of the whole interaction together that gives you the impression, oh, I know this spirit. I've contacted this spirit before. And that does seem to be a genuine quality. It's something that I personally can attest to, that, in my various workings throughout the years. I feel that, working with an individual entity for a period of time gives you kind of a familiarity with the way they answer questions, or just the way that they feel when they're close.
And and that makes sense. But the thing that I find eerie about that is, again, how widespread it is for people who contact this spirit known as Zozo. I mean, that's it's very widespread, right? I mean, so that's a prominent demon with this. So, in any case, I hope you guys enjoyed that fan's submission. Again, that comes from Martin. Fully rehabilitated now. So, a hand of applause to Martin.
He has paid his debt to society and has now, entered the everyday world of the rest of us. And like Will said, congratulations, and good for you.
And he's also done a good deed by providing, hopefully, some entertainment for you guys. So with that having been said, I hope you catch us next time. And if you have your own effed up story on the paranormal, or you got videos or pictures, you can get that to us at our official website, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. We're making an effort to get all of your submissions into podcasts, and of course they'll get on the website. So get that into us. We'll be covering near-death experiences in about a week from now. So if you have a story on that, get that into us ASAP, and we will catch you next time.
Have a great night, everyone. Thank you for listening.